They waited until everyone was seated. Plates full. Glasses raised. Then my mother-in-law smiled and said, "We need to talk about her." Before I could react, my sister-in-law slid her phone across the table, photos, timestamps, whispers of my affairs. The room turned on me instantly. Even my husband didn't defend me. They thought I'd cry. Beg. Confess to something I never did. What they didn't know was this: every lie they exposed was about to expose them. When I first married into my husband's family, everyone told me I was lucky. Lucky to marry into a family so respected, so polished, so admired. They were the kind of people who hosted charity dinners and posed for photos like they were born knowing where the camera was. Their house always smelled like expensive candles. Their smiles were practiced. Controlled. Perfect. At family gatherings, they spoke softly but confidently, dropping subtle reminders of their success into casual conversation. My mother-in-law liked to say things like, "We value reputation above everything," while smiling directly at me, as if it were both advice and warning. My father-in-law rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. Authority clung to him like a tailored suit. My sister-in-law was the most charming of them all. Beautiful, sharp, and always watching. She'd compliment me just a little too sweetly. "You're so different from us," she'd say, laughing, like it was a joke. I laughed too, not realizing that different was never meant kindly. My husband, back then, felt like my safe place. He brushed off their comments. Told me I was imagining things. "That's just how they are," he'd say. "They'll warm up." So I tried harder. I dressed better. Spoke less. Smiled more. I learned quickly that in this family, love was conditional, and silence was expected. From the outside, we looked flawless. But behind closed doors, I always felt like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. I didn't realize it yet, but I hadn't married into a family. I'd married into a system. And systems don't protect outsiders, they test them, quietly, until they break. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about rejection in families like this, it comes in whispers, not screams. Small comments slipped into conversation and disguised as concern. My mother-in-law would tilt her head and say, "You're very confident for someone from your background," then quickly add a laugh, like she'd paid for forgiveness in advance. At dinners, I noticed how conversations shifted when I spoke. Someone would change the subject. Someone else would glance at my husband, waiting for him to steer things back on course. If I shared an opinion, it was met with polite silence. If my sister-in-law said the same thing 5 minutes later, suddenly it was brilliant. Worth discussing. Worth praising. She had a way of asserting quiet dominance. Always sitting closer to my husband than I liked. Finishing his sentences. Reminding everyone of childhood stories where she was the star and I was conveniently absent. "We've always been close," she'd say, resting her hand on his arm just a second too long. What hurt most wasn't them, it was him. My husband began correcting me in front of them. Small things. The way I told a story. The way I remembered an event. "That's not exactly how it happened," he'd say, smiling, but never looking at me. It made me doubt myself. Made me shrink. I started feeling like I was on trial for a crime no one had explained. Every action measured. Every word weighed. I learned to read the room before I spoke. Learned when to disappear into the background. Because in that family, acceptance wasn't given. It was rationed. And no matter how hard I tried, I was always just short of earning it. The shift was subtle at first, almost invisible unless you were the one being watched. I began to notice how questions about my schedule became more specific. "Who were you with today?" my mother-in-law would ask casually, already knowing the answer. My sister-in-law started showing up places she had no reason to be, coffee shops near my work, the gym at odd hours, always smiling like coincidence was her favorite hobby. Phones became a presence at every gathering. Not in hands, just there. Face down on the table. Charged. Waiting. I'd catch reflections in the glass cabinets, someone angling their screen just enough to capture a moment. A laugh. A hug. Something harmless that could later be twisted into something else. If I arrived home late, even by minutes, my husband would ask why. Not with concern, but curiosity sharpened into suspicion. "You didn't text," he'd say. When I did text, he'd ask who else was there. It felt like I was being slowly boxed in by invisible walls I hadn't agreed to. My sister-in-law began asking leading questions. "Work lunches can get intimate, don't you think?" Or, "Men mistake kindness for interest all the time." She'd watch my face closely afterward, like a scientist waiting for a reaction. I gave her none. That only made her try harder. I told myself I was imagining it. That stress was making me paranoid. But deep down, I felt it, the tension, the scrutiny, the way every move I made was being recorded somewhere, even if not on a screen. They weren't just observing me anymore. They were collecting me. And I didn't yet understand what they planned to build from the pieces. The invitation came on a Tuesday, wrapped in forced cheer. My mother-in-law called instead of texting, which should have been my first warning. "We're hosting a special family dinner this weekend," she said. "Everyone will be there." The way she emphasized everyone made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't explain why. She insisted on dressing up the occasion. Formal table settings. Assigned seats. A menu she recited like a performance. It wasn't a celebration, and it wasn't a holiday. It felt more like a stage being built. When I asked what we were celebrating, she laughed lightly. "Oh, nothing at all. Just family." The house looked different that night, too perfect. Candles lit in every corner. Phones placed neatly beside plates, face down, like silent witnesses. Relatives I barely knew filled the room, watching me with curiosity instead of warmth. Whispers followed me as I walked past, stopping the moment I turned around. My husband barely spoke to me. He avoided my eyes, focused on his plate like it held answers he didn't want to give. When I reached for his hand under the table, he pulled away, pretending to adjust his napkin. That was when the unease settled into something heavier. Something final. Dinner began slowly. Forced laughter. Clinking glasses. My sister-in-law kept smiling at me from across the table, her expression unreadable. My mother-in-law waited, patient and composed, letting the tension thicken. I realized then, this dinner wasn't about togetherness. It was about timing. And whatever was coming had been rehearsed carefully, long before I ever sat down. It happened mid-dinner, right after dessert plates were cleared but before anyone stood up. My mother-in-law dabbed her lips with a napkin and sighed, the kind of sigh meant to command attention. The room quieted instantly. Even the clinking of cutlery stopped. She looked around the table once, slow and deliberate, then turned her gaze toward me. "I didn't want to do this," she said softly. "But as a family, we believe in honesty." Before I could respond, my sister-in-law reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She didn't hesitate. She slid it across the table like a piece of evidence in a courtroom. The screen was already lit. A photo stared back at me, standing outside a cafe, laughing with a man from work. Taken from across the street. Cropped carefully. Framed perfectly. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered my name. Another relative shook their head in disappointment. My mother-in-law leaned back, folding her hands like she was bracing herself through heartbreak. "There are more," she said. And there were. Another photo. A different day. A different angle. Me in a parking lot, hugging someone goodbye. Someone I hadn't seen in months. Someone married. Someone harmless. But the way they'd captured it, zoomed in, frozen, it looked damning. My sister-in-law's voice was almost gentle. "We didn't want to believe it either," she said. "But patterns don't lie." I looked at my husband. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the phone like it had just rewritten our entire marriage. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. Not "what is this?" Not explain. Just, "Is it true?" That hurt more than the photos. More than the whispers spreading around the table. I felt the weight of every eye on me, waiting for a breakdown, a confession, a performance. The room buzzed with judgment disguised as concern. I realized then this wasn't about truth. It was about spectacle. They didn't just want to accuse me. They wanted an audience. And they were very confident I had nothing left to say, that I waited for him to defend me. Just once. A single sentence would have been enough. "She wouldn't do that. There has to be an explanation. Anything." But my husband stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the table like the truth might be written in the grain of the wood. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "Careful. You need to explain this," he said, as if I were the problem that needed solving. Not the ambush. Not the photos. Me. My chest tightened. Years of trust collapsed in that moment. He knew me. Or at least, I thought he did. He knew how often my sister-in-law exaggerated. He knew his mother's talent for control. And still, when it mattered, he chose the version of me they handed him. My mother-in-law reached over and touched his arm, a gesture meant to look comforting but felt possessive. "We'll get through this," she said, to him. Not to me. I was no longer part of the equation. I tried to speak, but every word felt too small. The room had already decided. Relatives avoided my eyes, or stared openly, like betrayal was contagious. Someone whispered, "I always wondered," and laughed under their breath. That laugh still echoes in my head. My husband rubbed his temples. "If you were unhappy," he said quietly, "you could have just told me." That sentence landed harder than any accusation. It assumed guilt. It rewrote our history in one breath. I felt myself shrinking, not because I believed them, but because I realized how alone I was. The person who was supposed to stand beside me was standing behind them instead. That was the real betrayal. The lies were just props. This was the moment I understood. Whatever happened next, my marriage had already ended at that table. Something strange happened after that. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself the way everyone expected me to. I just sat there, breathing slowly, letting the noise wash over me. And that, more than anything, unsettled them. My mother-in-law kept glancing at my face, waiting for tears. My sister-in-law watched closely, her smile fading each second I stayed calm. They wanted guilt. Panic. A crack. But I gave them nothing. I folded my hands in my lap and listened. That's when I noticed it, the way their story had a rhythm. Practiced lines. Perfect timing. Each accusation handed off smoothly, like they'd rehearsed it in private. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a performance. And I was meant to play the role of the disgraced wife. I realized then that defending myself would only feed them. They didn't want the truth. They wanted control. Tears would make them powerful. Anger would make me look unstable. Silence, though, silence made them nervous. My husband finally looked at me, confused. "Aren't you going to say something?" he asked. His voice wavered, just slightly. He wasn't expecting this version of me. I met his eyes and held them. Calm. Steady. Unapologetic. That's when the room shifted. The whispers stopped. My sister-in-law crossed her arms. My mother-in-law cleared her throat, too quickly. They thought they had trapped me. What they didn't realize was that I'd stopped reacting because I was thinking. Listening. Remembering. Somewhere between the accusations and the silence, I saw the shape of their mistake. And once you see a trap clearly, you don't panic. You wait. The longer the silence stretched, the more confident they became. And confidence, I've learned, makes people careless. My sister-in-law broke first. It's not just one photo, she said quickly. This has been going on for months. Months. That word landed quietly, and stuck. My mother-in-law nodded in agreement. We started noticing patterns early this year, she added. Late evenings. Sudden errands. Distance. She spoke like she was reciting facts, not realizing she was adding details no one had asked for. I tilted my head slightly, just enough to look curious. Early this year. I repeated softly. My husband frowned. What do you mean? My sister-in-law waved a hand. January. Maybe February. She shrugged, like exact dates didn't matter. But they did. Very much. Because in January, I wasn't even in the country. I didn't say that yet. I let them keep talking. Let them stack their assumptions higher. Another relative chimed in, mentioning a dinner they claimed I'd skipped to meet someone else. A dinner I could prove I attended, with photos, receipts, and witnesses. They were building their case too fast, too loosely. Contradictions slipped through the cracks. Timelines overlapped. Stories didn't line up. And the more they talked, the clearer it became, they hadn't uncovered anything. They'd assembled it. I glanced around the table. Some relatives were starting to look uncertain now. Confused. They'd sensed it too, the subtle wobble in a story that had been presented as solid truth. My mother-in-law noticed the shift and tried to regain control. Details aren't the point, she said sharply. The behavior is. That was her mistake. Because once someone tells you details don't matter, it's usually because the details are about to betray them. And I finally understood something important. They hadn't planned for me to stay calm long enough to listen. And now, they couldn't stop themselves from talking. While they were busy watching me, I had been paying attention too, just not in the way they expected. Months earlier, when the questions started getting sharper, I'd felt something shift. Instinct, maybe. Or survival. Either way, I stopped brushing things off and started saving them. Every odd message. Every passive-aggressive text sent, by accident. Screenshots quietly archived, labeled by date. I kept call logs from nights my husband claimed I didn't answer, messages from his sister asking strangely specific questions about my plans. Patterns form when you stop dismissing them as coincidence. There were also things they assumed I didn't have access to. Shared accounts. Family cloud storage they forgot I was logged into. Security footage from the building where I worked, footage that showed exactly who I was with and when. Not secret meetings. Not hidden affairs. Normal, boring, painfully innocent moments. I remembered dates because I had to. I traveled for work in January. I had receipts. Boarding passes. Hotel confirmations. Photos posted publicly, smiling beside colleagues they could easily verify. Yet somehow, those were the months they claimed my affairs began. I never planned to use any of it. Not at first. I just wanted to understand why I suddenly felt like a suspect in my own marriage. But when people watch you closely enough, they reveal themselves in the process. My sister-in-law's timelines didn't match her own texts. My mother-in-law's concern conveniently aligned with moments my husband and I argued. And my husband, He'd been sharing my schedule without telling me, long before that dinner was planned. Sitting there, listening to them unravel, I realized something quietly powerful. I wasn't unprepared. I wasn't cornered. I was holding proof in my pocket while they waved assumptions in the air. They thought I was walking into that dinner empty-handed. They were wrong that I let the silence settle until it grew uncomfortable. You could feel it pressing in on the table, heavy and expectant. Then I slowly pushed my chair back and stood. No sudden movements. No shaking hands. Just calm. "I have a question," I said evenly. Every head turned toward me. My mother-in-law stiffened. My sister-in-law's smile vanished completely. My husband looked relieved, like he thought this was finally the moment I'd confess or beg. I held up one finger. Just one. I turned to my sister-in-law first. "You said this started in January. Are you sure?" My voice was steady, almost gentle. She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. "Yes," she said. "That's when we noticed the change." I nodded, then looked at my mother-in-law. "And you said February, correct?" She agreed quickly, too quickly. I took a breath and looked around the table. "Does anyone here remember me traveling for work in January?" A few relatives exchanged glances. Someone nodded slowly. My husband frowned. "What does that have to do with?" "Everything," I said quietly. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Not to show them yet. Just to let them see I had one too. I hadn't been empty-handed. I never was. "I'm just trying to understand," I continued, "how I was having affairs while I was out of the country. Or how I skipped dinners I have photos from. Or how these pictures were taken on days my location was publicly documented." No one spoke. The room felt suddenly smaller. I wasn't accusing yet. I wasn't revealing everything. I was doing something far more unsettling. I was asking questions they hadn't prepared answers for. And for the first time that night, the confidence they walked in with began to crack as I unlocked my phone and placed it on the table, screen facing them. Not shoved. Not slammed. Just set down, carefully, like something fragile. "Since we're sharing evidence," I said, "I thought it was only fair." I tapped the screen once. A calendar appeared, my calendar. Dates highlighted, flights logged, meetings scheduled. "January," I said calmly. "I was in Singapore for 11 days. I scrolled. Boarding passes. Hotel receipts. Time-stamped photos with colleagues." The room went quiet enough to hear someone swallow. My husband leaned forward, his face draining of color. "You told me that was a conference," he whispered. "It was," I replied. "And these are the records you never asked to see." Then I turned the phone toward my sister-in-law. "You said these photos were taken in February." I opened a folder. "But your phone saved the originals to the family cloud in March." I paused. "From your device." Her mouth opened. Closed. She didn't speak. My mother-in-law straightened. "That doesn't prove." "It proves access," I interrupted, still calm. "And motive." I slid another screenshot forward. Text messages. Her texts. Messages she'd sent my husband late at night, questioning where I was. Asking him to watch me. Suggesting he check my phone. Concern, she'd called it. Pattern building, in reality. Then I showed the final piece. Security footage. A still image from the cafe. The same moment they'd accused me of cheating. The wider frame showed the man clearly, his wedding ring, his wife sitting across from us, laughing. A work lunch. Boring. Innocent. The room froze. My sister-in-law stared at the table. My mother-in-law's lips pressed into a thin line. Relatives shifted, suddenly unsure whose side they were on. My husband looked like the ground had disappeared beneath him. "You didn't expose my affairs," I said quietly. "You tried to manufacture them." No one interrupted me now. "You watched me. You tracked me. You collected moments and twisted them." I looked directly at my husband. "And you let them." That was when the silence became unbearable. Not because I was finished, but because there was nothing left for them to deny. The shift in the room was immediate and irreversible. Conversations that had once flowed so confidently stopped altogether. Relatives who had avoided my eyes earlier were now staring openly at my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, their expressions sharp with disbelief. Someone whispered, "Is that true?" and this time, no one answered. My sister-in-law tried to laugh it off. A thin, brittle sound. "This is being taken out of context," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Her hands trembled as she reached for her glass, knocking it slightly against the table. The sound echoed louder than it should have. My mother-in-law attempted to regain control. She straightened her posture and cleared her throat. "We were only trying to protect our family," she said, looking around for support. None came. Protecting a family doesn't involve planting lies and waiting for applause. Phones came out. Not mine, everyone else's. Screens lit up quietly as relatives texted spouses, friends, maybe even each other. The narrative was shifting in real time, and for the first time, they weren't the ones guiding it. My husband looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. His mouth opened, then closed again. Whatever defense he'd prepared earlier had evaporated. He finally understood what siding with them had cost him, and it was too late. Around the table, judgment reversed direction. Questions turned sharp. "Why would you do this?" someone asked my sister-in-law. Another turned to my mother-in-law. "Did you plan this dinner just to ambush her?" No one waited for answers. The damage was done. Their carefully constructed image cracked in front of witnesses they couldn't silence. And the humiliation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was worse. It was quiet, undeniable, and witnessed by everyone who mattered. I didn't stay to watch them argue among themselves. I'd already said everything that mattered. I picked up my phone, slid it back into my bag, and stood. No dramatic exit. No final glance meant to hurt. Just a quiet decision to leave a room that no longer deserved me. Behind me, the family I'd married into was unraveling. Trust fractured. Alliances shifted. The authority my mother-in-law wielded so effortlessly was gone, replaced by suspicion. My sister-in-law's silence spoke louder than any denial ever could. She'd lost control of the story, and that was everything to her. My husband followed me into the hallway. His voice broke when he said my name. I didn't stop walking. Some betrayals don't need conversations. They need consequences. In that moment, I understood something clearly: love without loyalty is just performance. What did I walk away with? My dignity. My truth. And the certainty that I wasn't crazy, paranoid, or wrong. I had trusted my instincts, and they had saved me. What did they lose? Their carefully maintained image. Their moral high ground. And, eventually, each other. Because lies like that don't just target one person, they poison every relationship they touch. I stepped outside into the night air and felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I'd won, but because I was finally free. They could keep their dinner table, their whispers, their control. I walked away with myself that I paused at the door, my hand resting on the handle longer than necessary. Not because I doubted my choice, but because I knew this was the last moment my words would carry any weight in that house. When I turned back, the room was quiet in a way that felt permanent. "I want to say one thing," I said. They all looked at me. My mother-in-law's face was tight, unreadable. My sister-in-law wouldn't meet my eyes. My husband stood frozen between us, unsure where he belonged. I never betrayed this family, I continued. I was loyal, to my marriage, to the truth, and to all of you. You didn't lose me because of lies. You lost me because you believed them. No one interrupted. You taught me something tonight, I said calmly. That trust in this family isn't built on honesty, it's built on control. And I don't belong in a place where silence is safer than truth. I looked at my husband one last time. You didn't protect me when it mattered. So I protected myself. Then I nodded once, not as forgiveness, but as closure. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't wait for explanations. Those come too late when respect is already gone. I opened the door and stepped out, leaving them with the only thing they couldn't manipulate anymore, what they'd shown everyone they truly were. I used to believe silence meant strength. That enduring discomfort was the price of keeping peace. But that night taught me something different. Silence only protects the people who benefit from it. Speaking up doesn't always make you loud. Sometimes it just makes you free. Walking away from that family wasn't easy, but staying would have cost me more than I was willing to pay. I learned that love without trust is fragile, and loyalty that isn't returned is a debt you shouldn't keep paying. You can't earn respect in a place designed to deny it. What surprised me most wasn't how carefully they planned my downfall, but how calm I felt once the truth was out. Because when you stop defending yourself against lies and start standing in facts, the fear disappears. Clarity replaces it. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt watched, doubted, or quietly cornered by people who should have protected you, trust your instincts. Pay attention to patterns. And don't underestimate the power of patience. Sometimes the strongest move isn't reacting. It's waiting until the truth can speak for itself. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. There are more like it, stories about betrayal, strength, and quiet revenge that doesn't need shouting to be heard. Stick around. You might hear one that feels uncomfortably familiar.